This is only the beginning. Ukraine is launching a logistical lockdown program in the Russian rear. And here are the results of the refinery strikes. Gasoline shortages are already starting in Russian regions. New weapons are already in the fight. Firepoint confirmed the combat use of a missile-carrying drone.
Well, we mounted, 8 S-5 missiles. It was quite simple to mount them all, and now they're flying.
Urgent! The Russian army has begun a sudden retreat.
The occupiers have begun retreating in the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk directions for the first time in a long while.
Britain and Poland have united against Putin amid Russian threats. Armenia is distancing itself from the Kremlin despite Russian warnings and is moving closer to the US.
Nikol Pashinyan has my full and unconditional support for re-election on June 7, 2026.
Optimistic forecasts from Merkel.
In 10 years, Ukraine will become an independent, free and sovereign country.
The insanity grows. In Murmansk, children were urged to go to war right at a school festival.
These and other topics right now. Hi, I'm Volodymyr Rabchin, and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, give us a like, and let's move on to the news. The refinery in Tuapse was hit again. The General Staff reports this. As a reminder, this plant is one of the largest oil refineries in southern Russia and is an absolutely legitimate target as it provides fuel and lubricants to the occupying army. In addition, Russian Air Force reconnaissance complexes in the Voronezh, Taganrog, and Sevastopol areas were struck. Storm Shadow missiles paid a visit there. Hits were recorded on the command posts of occupying units and a logistics warehouse in the Luhansk region. A radar station and a command and staff vehicle of the Bukom 2 system were also hit there. A UAV production facility was attacked in the Zaporizhzhia region. More details on the precise Ukrainian strikes, as well as their consequences for the occupying army, the Kremlin regime, and ordinary Russians in this report.
It's heating up across Russia, from Voronezh to Tuapse.
Talk about a wake-up call.
For the 5th time this spring, the Tuapse refinery has been hit by the Ukrainian Armed Forces.
Holy crap, a missile just hit. 2 missiles even.
Explosions were also heard overnight in Taganrog. An enterprise involved in the repair and modernization of Russian military aviation was successfully attacked. The morning didn't go well on the peninsula in annexed Sevastopol and Simferopol. Refineries aren't the only targets. Strikes are reported on the Baltimore military air base in Voronezh.
Talk about a wake-up call.
In Simferopol, as propagandists reported, a missile hit the building of the southern branch of the central bank.
In the Gogol Street area, according to preliminary reports, a missile also damaged an administrative building that had long been out of use.
Well, the target was the Black Sea Fleet's Air Force headquarters on that same Gogol Street. However, no photos or videos from there are being shown. Local residents are only sharing information online.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, I can't believe it, oh boy.
In Sevastopol, a strike on the Black Sea Fleet Air Force headquarters building. Part of Gogol Street in Sevastopol near the Air Force headquarters has been closed to traffic.
The occupied part of the Donetsk region also lost facilities important to the enemy.
What happened?
Locals saw a glow in the sky and heard explosions in Donetsk and Makivka. Ukraine has created a living hell for the logistics of the Russian Federation's troops.
Well, look what's happening, huh? They're gonna blow us up.
Key supply routes in occupied areas of Ukraine have come under fire from the armed forces.
Oh man.
Work, you piece of junk.
Is that gas?
Yes.
Our defenders are paying special attention to the land corridor connecting Russia to Crimea through occupied territories.
Another drone. Burned another vehicle.
We are talking about the Rostov-Mariupol-Melitopol-Jankoy route. This path plays a vital role for the occupiers in moving equipment, ammunition, fuel, and Russian army personnel. But as we can see, the Kremlin's plans have been disrupted.
Everything is going according to plan. According to plan, just according to plan. Right on schedule.
Traffic on certain sections of the highway is significantly hampered by the constant threat of strikes. Meanwhile, dissatisfaction among Russian military bloggers is growing. They blame collaborators for being unable to ensure the stable operation of logistics routes.
Hornet kamikaze drones are now flying over 150 kilometers from the front line, reaching the Veselo-Voznesenka checkpoint on the administrative border of the DPR and Rostov region.
All enemy equipment is under attack. Trucks, fuel tankers, fuel and lubricant depots, and transport hubs used to supply Russian units. And the effect is already visible. The Russian Federation is already preparing restrictions on fuel exports.
You're driving through Melitopol and there's no gas anywhere.
The Kremlin is considering a ban on diesel and kerosene exports following a series of attacks.
Hurrah!
The goal of our military is to complicate the delivery of resources to the front line and increase the burden on the enemy's supply system. In the event of further intensification of strikes, which is clearly inevitable, the supply of fuel, goods, and logistical support for Russian forces across the entire southern sector of the front could be at risk. Meanwhile, the armed forces of Ukraine are steadily purging Ukrainian land of the Russian world.
The Russians are reinforcing air defenses in Moscow, installing surface-to-air missile systems on skyscrapers. I would venture to guess that air defense systems are being pulled from other areas for this purpose. But drones can fly lower than these glass towers. And then what? In any case, it seems Tsar Putin has finally set his priorities, and it's not the safety of the regions. It was the 5th year of the Kyiv in 3 days operation. An explosion in Nizhny Novgorod. Local social media groups report an unidentified drone hitting a courthouse. The building sustained minimal damage, which could point to a staged Ukrainian attack by the Kremlin regime. Information is being clarified. Ukraine is launching a logistical lockdown of the Russian army. This was reported by Defense Minister Mikhailo Fyodorov. According to him, an additional 5 billion hryvnias have been allocated for the purchase of modern middle strike systems. Fedorov added that the results will be felt on the front lines as early as this summer, and the Russian army's pace of advancement is already at its lowest in 2 years. Even the tactic of infiltration by small groups is no longer working. Why did this happen, and what does it mean for the invaders? More on this next.
Just over 30 square kilometers in nearly a month of fierce fighting. That is the result of the Russian army's offensive operations for May. The Russian army's offensive pace has dropped to its lowest levels in the last 2 years. Even the most die-hard Z-War correspondents have begun to admit the stalemate on the front.
Some settlements have appeared in reports for so long that they've become household names. With the front line unchanged, the surrounding area is gradually becoming a completely targeted and ruined zone. Since attacking with armored columns became irrational in such conditions, troops switched to assaults by small infantry groups. Their task is to infiltrate through positions, with stealth being the key feature. However, this tactic is no longer working as it used to. Largely because of this, the front has simply stalled in most sectors, and the Russian offensive has effectively ceased.
Military bloggers have even started creating memes. For example, the village of Malotokmachka in the Zaporizhzhia region, which Russia has been trying to capture for over a year, all without success.
The retreat of assault groups from Malotokmachka has begun. I couldn't do it, I just couldn't. Pipe as results.
There is a resource that is essentially a pro-Russian counterpart to the Ukrainian mapping service Deep State, called Crimea Caprice. It differs in that some maps present a much more optimistic assessment than the general consensus among many analysts. In other words, they mark territories as being under Russian control where stormtroopers with flags have only just appeared, when in reality, it's still a gray zone. So even according to their own data, based on those more optimistic estimates, it turns out that May is ending with almost a negative figure regarding the pace of Russia's advance.
Some military analysts believe that the Russian army's offensive hasn't actually started yet. For now, the Kremlin is building up its forces, and so there are no real changes on the front line. But even if such a breakthrough does occur, it won't end well for the Kremlin at all.
Right now they're preparing for such an offensive, moving forces, trying to scrape together some reserves, and are already attacking in some areas. For the Kremlin, this offensive will be their very last chance. But judging by the current strength of the Ukrainian Armed Forces and the abundance of drones, the Russian army's offensive will only lead to its total defeat. Ian Matviv, military analyst.
In terms of the intensity and number of attacks, May and June are considered the most convenient and productive months for offensive operations. But, as we can see, the Russian army is not only failing to advance, but in some sectors of the front it's actually retreating.
If June turns out to be the same as May, it's a very clear sign that in terms of the war, things have gone badly for the Russian army, and the pace, it's dropped almost to zero in those months when there should be maximum breakthroughs.
A stalemate on the front for the Russian army is the main message being conveyed by Russian military correspondents. All experts unanimously name the main reason for the zero progress as the quantitative and technological leap of the Ukrainian Armed Forces in the use of drones and the quality of communication.
Losses of the Russian armed forces have begun to exceed recruitment. Ukraine has made a leap in technology, quantity, and range of drone use, from frontline to long-range ones. The reality is that the Russians are having difficulties on the front, and things are not going very well for them. Lawrence Friedman, Professor of War Studies at King's College London.
The war has changed significantly this year. That's true. We see that now, in terms of quality, Ukrainian forces are superior to Russian ones in terms of, for example, drones. And as we remember, drones in this war are the main means of destruction. So roughly 80 to 90% of losses on both sides come from drones, not from missiles, not from aerial bombs, but specifically from drones. And although there's parity in quantity, qualitatively, the advantage is on Ukraine's side, especially regarding the quality of communication. I mean, after all, Ukraine still has Starlinks, while Russia no longer has them.
Experts also lean towards the fact that the chances of Russia using tactical nuclear weapons are close to zero. These are just more scare stories, as the situation on the front is not in favor of the occupying forces.
Over the past 24 hours, the Russian army has lost at least 1,160 occupiers killed and wounded. Thus, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we are talking about 1,360,110 invaders. In addition, over the last 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces have destroyed 1 Russian tank, 7 armored combat vehicles, 42 artillery systems, and dozens of other pieces of Russian military equipment. It's high time to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and share it. Please do it right now. Thank you and glory to Ukraine! The Kremlin is threatening a nuclear strike and urging embassies to leave Kiev as soon as possible. These scare stories are being voiced not just by Russian propagandists, but even by the chairman of the State Duma, Volodin.
Instead of peace and negotiations with Ukraine, the Kremlin chooses nuclear blackmail and a new round of escalation.
Loudly so that they can hear. A triple hurrah. 3. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. What a wonderful moment.
The target audience for this nuclear saber rattling is the West. The Speaker of the Russian State Duma, Vyacheslav Volodin, has taken to directly threatening Elon Musk with the destruction of human civilization.
Elon Musk himself must understand that his satellites are being used to kill children. His respectable image is in no way consistent with what is actually happening. In fact, the reality of the situation is quite different. All of this could eventually lead to us using the kind of weapon that will leave no trace of anyone behind.
Beyond Volodin's words and Medvedev's angry posts, the Russian authorities are trying to back up their threats with actions. Nuclear drills in Belarus and the third Oreshnik launch against Ukraine are links in a single propaganda chain that the authors intend for the West to believe.
When Russia uses the Oreshnik, what it is really doing is saying, you see, this is what could happen. What might occur if the Oreshnik were to be used together with nuclear weapons?
At the same time, the Russian Foreign Ministry is calling on diplomats to evacuate from Kiev. Lavrov is repeating the same thing in a private conversation with Marco Rubio. Moscow is relying on past experience when the United States fell for Russia's threats. For example, when addressing Musk, the Kremlin remembers that the billionaire previously disabled Starlink during a Ukrainian military attack on occupied Crimea.
Putin is trying to influence the so-called Western mentality. We are discussing with our partners that we must not give in to Russian blackmail. The world's reaction must be proportionate, meaning additional aid packages and further sanctions. Putin must understand that he will achieve nothing through military means.
But the Kremlin elders are overlooking one vital factor. For 5 years, Ukraine has been showing the world in practice that there's no need to fear Putin's nuclear club. You can blow up FSB headquarters, burn major oil refineries, sink fleets, and destroy strategic aircraft. And the sky will not fall to the earth.
The intimidation strategy only works for the first month, and that applies to the local population in any country where there's a war. It also applies to the allies of the country where the war is taking place. It's a known fact because war becomes commonplace by the 5th year.
Military experts and analysts insist on another important detail. Before using nuclear weapons, the Kremlin will need nuclear tests with a real bomb blast, not that theater of launching more dummies in Belarus.
I request your permission.
Please, proceed according to the plan you've developed.
Yes, sir. To the division commander, target 10001, readiness level 1.
The main result of Russia's nuclear blackmail is its total devaluation. The old man wants to scare everyone with his nuclear club, but the world no longer buys the Russian Führer's lies.
Shortly after the Russian threats, reports emerged about the evacuation of American diplomats. However, the United States has denied this information. A statement from the American mission in Kiev said there were no changes in the diplomatic mission's operations. Sweden is transferring 16 Gripen fighter jets to Ukraine. The relevant documents were signed by President Zelensky and Prime Minister Kristersson. The delivery of the aircraft is expected to take place in early 2027. Ukraine will purchase another 22 fighter jets. Sweden will provide them by the year 2030. Lithuania's capital will be surrounded by Russian troops as early as the 5th day of the war. Such a scenario was published by The Times. According to the publication, in the event of an invasion of this Baltic country, Putin's troops would advance through eastern Latvia, attack from Belarus toward Vilnius, and simultaneously break through from the Kaliningrad region. However, it should be noted that NATO has already prepared its troops. The North Atlantic Alliance considers a Russian attack to be highly probable.
NATO is preparing for an invasion. Up to 60,000 troops could be deployed to Russia's borders. Amid the war in Ukraine and new mobilization rhetoric in the Kremlin, there's increasing talk in Europe about a possible expansion of the conflict.
Can I take a photo?
NATO countries are indeed strengthening their eastern flank. Germany and the Netherlands are forming separate command structures to protect Latvia and Estonia. This is a new defense architecture designed to reduce reaction time in the event of a crisis.
So, as we can see, preventive actions by NATO countries to prevent the possibility of a direct invasion by Russian troops into Baltic territory are currently being maximized by the military and political leadership of both the United States and its European partners.
An additional factor of concern is the possible reduction of the American military presence in Europe. The US plans to withdraw part of its contingent from Germany, which is about 5,000 troops. But is everything as they say it is?
So, first, Trump's statements, which were met with skepticism at the time of the alleged weakening of the defensive potential of NATO countries. But in reality, we're talking about the redeployment of American troops practically to the border with the Russian Federation. The point is that the Republic of Belarus is viewed by the Russian Federation as a zone of its military and political influence.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin's talking points never end. They're speaking more and more harshly about the policies of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia.
A retaliatory strike in such conditions will be inevitable. And yes, Madam Ambassador of Latvia, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service stated that the coordinates of decision-making centers on Latvian territory are well known, and the country's NATO membership will not protect terrorist accomplices from just retribution.
Special attention was drawn to a new law signed by the bunker dweller. It expands the grounds for using the Russian army abroad under the pretext of protecting citizens of the Russian Federation. But we've heard this somewhere before.
In fact, it's a direct reference to the Baltic states and countries of the post-Soviet space. This is the legal justification for a possible direct military invasion of the territories of former Soviet republics. And we're not just talking about the Baltic states, but also, accordingly, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Moldova, and consequently, the countries of the South Caucasus. These are the former Soviet republics of Azerbaijan and Armenia.
But it's not just about Putin's threats. More and more often, European rhetoric mentions Kaliningrad, so important to Putin, which is surrounded by NATO countries.
We must show the Russians that we can break into their little fortress they've built in Kaliningrad. NATO has the capability and the necessary means to level or neutralize Russian air defense and missile bases in that area, if it becomes necessary.
For the first time, an alert in Kaliningrad. Has it finally happened? A NATO preemptive strike? But no. For now, the alert was issued due to a drone threat.
The territory of the Kaliningrad region is currently being militarized by the Russian Federation. Additional multiple rocket launchers and accordingly S-400 air defense systems have been deployed there, and plus operational tactical missile systems. For the Russian Federation, Kaliningrad is an outpost of confrontation with NATO countries. It is the control over the Kaliningrad region that allows the Russian Federation to effectively loom over the entire Baltic region.
Despite all the escalating rhetoric and military preparations, Western intelligence agencies emphasize that no signs of Russia's immediate preparation for a direct attack on NATO countries are currently being recorded.
Nevertheless, some Russian activity is being recorded on our borders. Surveillance, provocations. We observed such reckless behavior in the Baltic Sea and in our airspace even before 2022. Russia also uses pressure through migrants on our borders, and they are definitely set for broader activity, sabotage, intimidation. But what is happening, in my opinion, only demonstrates Russia's weakness.
The situation remains tense but controlled, with no signals of a transition to open conflict. But is that really the case?
A missile and drone strike could be launched on the territory of the Baltic countries, that is, without a land component. Given the total advantage of the Russians in strike capabilities, this scenario is the most realistic. Plus, up to 5,000 personnel of the Wagner private military company are concentrated in Belarus.
Currently, Europe sees no signs of an immediate Russian attack on NATO countries, but such a scenario is not entirely ruled out. At the same time, they admit the Kremlin might try to test the alliance's readiness and unity amid a long war and political instability in the EU, for which NATO itself is seriously preparing.
Finally, about the significant achievements of the terrorist state. I'm talking about the huge hole in the Russian budget. It seems it's hard to talk about it without swearing. Well, at least Russian State Duma Deputy Hartung couldn't hold back. More details about the deficit in the report.
They've managed it into the ground. State Duma deputies are characterizing the situation with the Russian budget using profanity. We're talking about Valery Hartung, chairman of the State Duma Committee on Competition Protection, who described the growing hole in the federal budget.
Well, let's see. What are we going to do about the federal budget deficit? Last year we had over 5 trillion, and now another nearly 5 trillion. So in total, it's already about 11 trillion. What are we going to do about this? Are we going to print money or something, like in '92, when prices rose by 30% every week?
Hartung asks his colleagues what to do in this situation and puts forward his proposal: collect money where it is, in natural monopolies, in the raw materials and financial sectors.
The expenditure part of the Russian budget has currently increased by 16%. These are record figures. This is evidence that the Russian economy has effectively overheated. The only source of replenishing the Russian treasury was the sale of oil and petroleum products to end consumers. And at the moment, the Russian Federation has been forced to cut production, not refining, but specifically oil production, to 400,000 barrels per day. These are record-breaking drops in oil production since the coronavirus pandemic. The Russian side itself cites successful Ukrainian drone attacks on major oil refineries within the Russian Federation as the reason for the drop in Russian oil production.
A short while later, Valery Hartung commented on his expressive speech and insisted that there was no profanity in it.
Valery Hartung, State Duma deputy of the Russian Federation. There was no profanity at all. Why would there be? What kind of swearing could there be? No, it's impossible. It's out of the question. I don't have such words in my vocabulary. It might slip out for someone who has it in their vocabulary, but I don't.
As of April, Russia's budget deficit has increased to a record 5.9 trillion rubles, or 2.5% of GDP. Even oil revenues didn't save the situation despite the war in the Middle East.
I'll remind you, 40% of the Russian budget depends on foreign currency earnings, specifically from the sale of oil, gas, and other fossil fuels. The Russian Federation has effectively remained a raw material appendage. And given that China refused the Russian Federation's request to build the second line of the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, Russia's ability to diversify gas and oil sales to either China or other consumers has effectively dropped to zero.
Although Russia manipulates real economic figures to convince Ukraine's Western allies that the Russian economy has withstood military spending and Western sanctions, the situation for Russians is not the best. To close the budget hole, the Bank of Russia has sold nearly 22 tons of gold since the start of 2026, and 2026 itself is being called a point of no return for the Russian economy.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Strength to the Ukrainian defenders. Glory to Ukraine! Subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share this video. And see you soon.